The air tasted like ash and regret as I stared at the mountain lodge, the scene of my public humiliation. The champagne flute lay in fragments at my feet, mirroring the shattered pieces of my dignity. Inside, the music pulsed, a mocking soundtrack to my despair, and I could see them through the panoramic windows, my brother, Parker, and his smug fiancée, raising their glasses in a toast. They thought they had broken me, silenced me, made me disappear from their perfect world, but they were wrong. This was not the end. It was the beginning of their nightmare. If you've ever felt betrayed by family, if your own brother or sister has ever made you feel worthless, subscribe now and join a community that understands your pain and will help you find your strength to rise above the darkness. We are a family here, and we stand together against those who seek to tear us down. Subscribe now and let's begin. It had started so innocently, or so I had believed. Years of casual belittling, snide remarks disguised as brotherly teasing, all building to this crescendo of cruelty. My name is Tiffany, and for as long as I could remember, I was the family's disappointment, the black sheep destined to graze on the fringes of their success. Parker, on the other hand, was the golden child, the Harvard graduate, the rising star in Denver's cutthroat real estate market. My parents, blinded by his achievements, reinforced this narrative, their praise for Parker always laced with subtle digs at my lack of ambition or my unconventional choices. I'd tried to ignore it, to carve my own path as a freelance photographer, capturing the raw beauty of the Colorado landscape. But their judgment always lingered, a shadow that darkened even my brightest moments. The engagement party was supposed to be a turning point, a chance to finally bridge the gap between us. Parker was marrying into one of Denver's wealthiest families, and the celebration was a lavish affair, held at a sprawling mountain lodge overlooking the city. He had personally invited me, even insisted that I be there, and for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe that he genuinely wanted me to be a part of his happiness. I dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant dress, hopping to blend in, to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. But Parker had other plans. As I navigated the crowded room, searching for a familiar face, he intercepted me, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Tiffany," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth, "so glad you could make it. There's someone I want you to meet." He steered me towards a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his face etched with arrogance. "Mr. Sterling, this is my sister, Tiffany, you know, the family's failure." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel, and the man chuckled, a low, dismissive sound that sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the opulent surroundings, but I was frozen, trapped in the spotlight of their ridicule. The man, Sterling, barely glanced at me, his attention already drifting back to Parker. They exchanged a few words, discussing some lucrative deal, their voices laced with condescension. I stood there, invisible, my heart pounding in my chest. The room seemed to tilt, the music blurring into a cacophony of sound. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to shatter their perfect facade, but I remained silent, swallowing the bitter pill of their contempt. Years of suppressed anger simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over, but I forced myself to remain calm, to maintain a semblance of composure. This was not the time. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and I had a feeling a storm was brewing. I excused myself, feigning a headache, and retreated to the relative solitude of the balcony. The crisp mountain air offered little solace, and the panoramic view of the city felt like a cruel reminder of my own insignificance. That's when I heard them, their voices carrying through the open window. Parker was bragging about his latest conquest, his voice laced with arrogance. "Tiffany, she's nothing, a waste of space. I only invited her out of obligation. Besides, it's always good to have a reminder of how far I've come." Sterling laughed, a deep, guttural sound that echoed in my ears. "You're a lucky man, Parker, you've got it all. The person I trusted most was one of them." The words hung in the air, each syllable a hammer blow against my already fractured self-esteem. I wanted to run, to disappear into the anonymity of the night, but my feet were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a toxic blend of humiliation and rage. How could my own brother, the person who was supposed to be my protector, my confidant, speak about me with such utter contempt? The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering on the stone balcony, the sound echoing the destruction of my illusions. I turned and fled, pushing my way through the throng of revelers, their laughter and chatter grating on my raw nerves. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my breath coming in ragged gasps, tears streaming down my face. As I drove away from the lodge, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of color, I knew that I couldn't let this go. This wasn't just about wounded pride, it was about years of accumulated injustice, of being constantly diminished and belittled. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my kindness for stupidity. They thought they could control me, manipulate me, erase me from their narrative, but they were wrong. I would not be silenced. I would not disappear. I would make them pay. The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and obsessive planning. I replayed the events of the engagement party in my mind, each detail etched into my memory with painful clarity. I analyzed Parker's behavior, searching for clues, for vulnerabilities, for anything that could give me an edge. I knew that I couldn't confront him directly. He was too skilled at manipulation, too adept at twisting the narrative to his advantage. I needed to find a way to expose him, to reveal his true character to the world, without implicating myself. I started digging, poring over old family records, searching for any skeletons in his closet. I contacted old acquaintances, former business partners, anyone who might have a reason to hold a grudge against him. Most of them were reluctant to talk, intimidated by Parker's power and influence. But I persisted, using my skills as a photographer to build rapport to gain their trust. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to piece together a picture of Parker's life that was far removed from the polished image he presented to the world. Shady business dealings, broken promises, and a string of betrayed relationships. I discovered that his carefully constructed success was built on a foundation of lies and deceit. The real estate empire he had so proudly displayed was riddled with unethical practices, exploiting vulnerable families and cutting corners to maximize profits. The man Mr. Sterling, that Parker introduced me to, was a key investor in several of Parker's projects. I also found out that Sterling had his own history of corruption, including several lawsuits for fraud and bribery. I also found out that the bride-to-be's family was in on the shady schemes, using the future marriage as a business merger. The deeper I dug, the more disgusted I became. How could my own brother be so callous, so devoid of empathy? How could my parents, who prided themselves on their morality, turn a blind eye to his transgressions? The weight of injustice grew heavier with each passing day, fueling my determination to expose their lies. I tried to talk to my parents, to share my findings with them, hoping that they would see the truth, that they would finally acknowledge the damage Parker had inflicted. But they refused to listen, dismissing my concerns as jealousy and resentment. "Parker is a good boy," my mother insisted, her voice laced with defensiveness. "He's just ambitious, you should be proud of him." My father nodded in agreement, his eyes fixed on the television screen. "Don't try to stir up trouble, Tiffany. You'll only make things worse." Their unwavering support for Parker, despite all the evidence to the contrary, was a betrayal in itself. It was as if they had chosen him over me, reaffirming the narrative that I was the family's disappointment, the one who could never measure up. Their words cut deep, reopening old wounds, but they also strengthened my resolve. I realized that I couldn't rely on them to do the right thing. I had to take matters into my own hands. I began to document everything, meticulously gathering evidence of Parker's misdeeds. I recorded phone calls, photographed documents, and collected testimonies from his victims. I knew that I was playing a dangerous game, that Parker would stop at nothing to protect his reputation, but I was no longer afraid. The fear had been replaced by a cold, unwavering determination. They had pushed me too far, underestimated me for too long. Now, it was their turn to face the consequences. Sleepless nights were spent hunched over my computer, piecing together the puzzle, connecting the dots, and crafting a plan that would bring their empire crashing down. My apartment, once a sanctuary of creativity, transformed into a war room filled with maps, documents, and photographs. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the rhythmic tapping of my fingers on the keyboard. I was a woman possessed, driven by a single, all-consuming goal: revenge. The faces of those Parker had wronged haunted my dreams, their silent pleas fueling my determination. I would be their voice, their champion, the instrument of their retribution. The clock was ticking and the storm was gathering. I could feel it in my bones. The day I lost everything started like any other. The Colorado sun streamed through my apartment window, casting long shadows across the floor. I remember thinking how beautiful the light was, how perfectly it illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a fleeting moment of peace, a brief respite from the storm that was brewing inside me. I made coffee, the bitter aroma filling the small space, and sat down at my computer, ready to resume my investigation. I was so close I could feel it. Just one more piece of the puzzle, one more connection to make, and I would have everything I needed to expose Parker's lies. But then the phone rang. It was my mother, her voice tight with panic. "Tiffany, you need to come home. Now it's Parker." My heart lurched. I knew something was terribly wrong. I raced to my car, my mind racing, imagining the worst. An accident, a business deal gone sour. I couldn't have prepared myself for what I was about to discover. When I arrived at my parents' house, the scene was chaotic. Police cars lined the street, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the manicured lawns. Neighbors stood huddled together, whispering, their faces etched with concern. I pushed my way through the crowd, my heart pounding in my chest, and found my parents inside, huddled together on the sofa, their faces ashen. Parker was there too, sitting across from them, his head in his hands. He looked broken, defeated, a stark contrast to the confident, arrogant man I knew. "What happened?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mother looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "He's been arrested, Tiffany. They're taking him away." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I stared at Parker, my mind reeling. Arrested? For what? As if reading my thoughts, my father spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Fraud," he said. "They're saying he defrauded his investors, that he's been running a Ponzi scheme." I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie, a twisted drama unfolding before my eyes. This was it. This was the moment I had been working towards, the culmination of my efforts. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt empty, hollow. The police led Parker away in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence. He just kept his head down, shuffling towards the waiting car. As the car pulled away, I saw my parents staring after it, their faces etched with disbelief and despair. Their golden boy, their perfect son, was gone, his reputation shattered, his future uncertain. And I was the one who had brought him down. The weight of that realization crashed down on me, crushing me with its intensity. I had wanted justice, I had wanted revenge, but this was more than I had bargained for. I had destroyed my own family, ripped apart the very fabric of our lives. I turned and fled, unable to bear the sight of my parents' grief. I drove aimlessly, the city lights blurring into streaks of color, my mind consumed by guilt and regret. I ended up at my usual overlook spot where I take photos. I stared out at the cityscape, the buildings rising like monuments to success and ambition. But tonight, they seemed cold and indifferent, mocking my own failures. The air was thick with the stench of irony. I sat there for hours, lost in my thoughts, the weight of my actions crushing me. I had become the very thing I hated, a destroyer of lives, a purveyor of pain. Was it worth it? Had I achieved anything, or had I simply sunk to their level? The darkness seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with its despair. I felt like giving up, like disappearing, like simply ceasing to exist. They had won. They had broken me, not in the way they had originally intended, but in a far more profound and devastating way. I was alone, isolated, consumed by guilt and regret. But then, a flicker of defiance ignited within me, a spark of resolve that refused to be extinguished. No, I would not let them win. I would not let their actions define me. I had made mistakes, yes, but I had also uncovered the truth, exposed their lies, and brought them to justice. That was something to be proud of. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the crisp mountain air. The city lights seemed a little brighter now, the darkness a little less oppressive. I would not let this break me. I would learn from my mistakes, rebuild my life, and emerge stronger than before. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready to face it. The transition from victim to planner had begun. I started small, focusing on the things I could control. I cleaned my apartment, throwing out anything that reminded me of Parker and his world. I spent time in nature, hiking in the mountains, reconnecting with the beauty and serenity of the Colorado landscape. I started volunteering at a local charity, helping those less fortunate than myself. Slowly, gradually, I began to heal, to rebuild my shattered self-esteem. I also started to refine my plan, to focus on the real issue. It wasn't just about Parker. It was about the entire system that had allowed him to thrive, the network of corruption and deceit that had enabled his misdeeds. I realized that exposing him was just the first step. I needed to take down the whole house of cards to reveal the rot that lay beneath the surface, and I knew exactly how to do it. The next phase of my plan required meticulous preparation and unwavering focus. I knew I couldn't afford any missteps. I needed to gather irrefutable evidence, build an airtight case, and expose their crimes in a way that would leave no room for doubt. I started by focusing on Sterling, his network of shell corporations, and the offshore accounts he used to launder money. I spent countless hours poring over financial records, tracing transactions, and identifying the key players in his operation. It was like navigating a labyrinth, each dead end leading to another, more complex puzzle. But I refused to be discouraged. I knew that somewhere within those convoluted accounts, the truth was hidden, waiting to be uncovered. I remembered Parker's reliance on technology. He always used encryption software and secure communication channels to protect his secrets. So I decided to learn everything I could about cybersecurity. I enrolled in online courses, attended workshops, and devoured books on hacking and digital forensics. It was a steep learning curve, but I was determined to master the skills I needed to infiltrate their digital fortress. I managed to install a keystroke logger on Parker's computer at his office, disguised as a routine software update. It captured every keystroke, every password, every email he typed. The data was encrypted and sent to a secure server, where I could analyze it at my leisure. I also invested in high-end surveillance equipment, including hidden cameras and directional microphones. I used them to monitor Sterling's meetings, gathering evidence of his corrupt dealings and illicit activities. I even managed to bug his office, capturing incriminating conversations that would later prove invaluable. As I delved deeper into their world, I realized that the corruption extended far beyond Parker and Sterling. It was a web of interconnected interests, involving politicians, law enforcement officials, and even members of the judiciary. They were all complicit, protecting each other, and profiting from the suffering of others. I knew that exposing them would be a risky undertaking, that I would be facing powerful enemies who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. But I refused to be intimidated. I had come too far to back down now. I started documenting everything, meticulously recording every conversation, every transaction, every piece of evidence I uncovered. I created a secure online database where I stored all the information, encrypted and password protected. I also made multiple backups, storing them in different locations, ensuring that nothing would be lost or destroyed. I knew that the information I had gathered was explosive, capable of bringing down an entire empire. But I also knew that it would be dangerous to release it without a plan. I needed to time my move perfectly to ensure that the authorities would act swiftly and decisively. I began to leak small pieces of information to investigative journalists, feeding them carefully curated stories that would pique their interest and encourage them to dig deeper. I knew that the media could be a powerful ally, amplifying my message and holding those in power accountable. But I also knew that I had to be careful, to protect my identity and avoid being exposed before I was ready. There were several close calls during this period, moments when I thought I had been discovered, when my entire plan was about to unravel. Once, I was tailing Sterling in my car when he suddenly made a U-turn and started driving in my direction. I managed to duck into a side street just in time, narrowly avoiding a collision. Another time, I was hacking into Parker's email account when I triggered an alert, alerting his IT department to a potential breach. I had to quickly cover my tracks, deleting my logs and erasing my digital footprint. It was a tense moment, but I managed to escape detection. These close calls only strengthened my resolve. They reminded me of the stakes involved, of the importance of what I was doing. I couldn't afford to fail. I had to see this through to the end. As the weeks turned into months, my plan began to take shape. I had gathered enough evidence to expose Parker, Sterling, and their cronies. I had identified their weaknesses, exploited their vulnerabilities, and crafted a strategy that would bring their empire crashing down. The time for action was approaching. I could feel it in my bones. I started preparing for the final strike, assembling my team, and putting the final pieces of the puzzle in place. I knew that once I set the plan in motion, there would be no turning back. I was ready. The anticipation was almost unbearable. My biggest advantage was their arrogance. They truly believed they were untouchable. They underestimated me every step of the way, blinded by their own self-importance. This was their fatal flaw, the chink in their armor that I would exploit to the fullest. They thought I was just a naive photographer, a harmless bystander. They had no idea of the storm I was about to unleash. I even started to act dumber. I started acting like the same old Tiffany. I attended family dinners, laughed at their jokes, and even asked Parker for career advice. I started working on a photography project, something completely innocuous, a series of landscape photos of the Colorado mountains. It was the perfect cover, allowing me to travel freely and take pictures without raising suspicion. But while I was taking pictures of mountains, I was also collecting evidence, documenting their crimes, and plotting their downfall. I smiled. I played their game, but I was recording everything. The feeling of anticipation was electric. The knowledge that their carefully constructed world was about to crumble filled me with a sense of power I had never experienced before. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of their destruction. And I couldn't wait to see their faces when the truth was finally revealed. The clock was ticking. The stage was set. The final act was about to begin. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, hidden in plain sight within Parker's seemingly innocuous travel itineraries. I had been reviewing his expenses, searching for any discrepancies that might link him to Sterling's offshore accounts, when I noticed a recurring pattern of trips to the Cayman Islands. Initially, I dismissed them as routine business excursions, but something about the timing felt off. Each trip coincided with a significant transfer of funds into one of Sterling's shell corporations. Digging deeper, I discovered that Parker wasn't just visiting the Cayman Islands. He was meeting with a shadowy figure known only as the Collector. This individual was rumored to be a financial wizard, a master of disguise, and a key player in Sterling's laundering operation. I needed to know more. I managed to obtain a high-resolution satellite image of the resort where Parker had been staying. Enhancing the image, I zoomed in on a secluded beach where Parker and the Collector were captured in discussion. The angle was poor, but clear enough to discern a small, metallic object changing hands, a data storage device. This was it, the key, the evidence I needed to unlock the entire conspiracy. It wasn't the money, it was the information. The trap had to be perfect, untraceable, irreversible. I crafted an anonymous email, disguised as an internal communication from Sterling's office, alerting Parker to a supposed security breach in their encrypted server. The email instructed him to immediately transfer the data from the Cayman Islands device to a new, highly secure server I had created. Of course, this server was nothing more than a honeypot, a digital trap designed to capture every bit of data he uploaded. I even included a fake vulnerability report, subtly implying that the Collector might be compromised and that their sensitive information was at risk. The bait was set. Now all I had to do was wait. The tension was excruciating. Each notification on my phone sent my heart rate skyrocketing. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities, both good and catastrophically bad. I checked the honeypot server constantly, refreshing the page, willing the data to appear. Hours turned into an agonizing eternity. Doubts gnawed at me. Had he seen through my deception? Had Sterling warned him? Was I about to lose everything? Then, finally, it happened. The server registered a connection. Data began to stream in, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. I watched in disbelief as the files uploaded, revealing the full extent of their crimes. Names, dates, amounts, everything meticulously documented in a series of spreadsheets and encrypted documents. The data was a ticking time bomb, powerful enough to dismantle their entire operation. The feeling of triumph was intoxicating. I meticulously downloaded everything, creating multiple backups and storing them in secure locations. I then activated the kill switch on the honeypot server, erasing all traces of my involvement. I had the evidence. I had the means. Now, all that remained was to expose them. I decided to leak the data to a team of investigative journalists I had been cultivating for months. I knew they would treat the information with the seriousness it deserved, and they had the resources to verify its authenticity and disseminate it to a wide audience. I packaged the data into a series of encrypted files, each containing a different piece of the puzzle. I then sent anonymous emails to each journalist, providing them with the passwords and instructions on how to decrypt the files. I made it clear that their lives could be at risk, that they were dealing with dangerous individuals who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. But I also emphasized the importance of their work, the need to expose the truth and bring these criminals to justice. The journalists took the bait, and they started digging. I knew that it was only a matter of time before the story broke. To add another layer of chaos, I leaked some minor information about the story to the SEC, making sure to do it anonymously through an untraceable email. I knew this would cause a panic, making them react in a way that I could further take advantage of. I watched the news, and sure enough, there was a flurry of activity around Parker, Sterling, and some of the other players I had identified. The SEC was asking questions, and investigators were starting to snoop around. I knew that my plan was working. I could feel it in my gut. I started to plan my final move, trying to find the perfect timing for the final blow. It had to be at the exact right moment, or the whole plan would be ruined. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated but answered it anyway. The voice on the other end was cold and mechanical. "You should have stayed quiet. Now you will disappear." The line went dead. My blood ran cold. They knew. They were coming. This was it. The final act was about to begin, and I had no idea if I was ready. The threat solidified my resolve. Fear turned to ice. I knew they were coming, but they didn't know I was ready for them. I triggered the final phase of my plan, a series of automated releases I had scheduled weeks in advance. First, the full data dump to the journalists, including Sterling's offshore accounts, Parker's communications, and the damning satellite images. Then, a similar package to the SEC, IRS, and FBI, ensuring that every relevant authority had the evidence they needed to act swiftly. Finally, I uploaded a heavily edited video to YouTube, a concise and devastating summary of their crimes, narrated with a synthesized voice and featuring redacted versions of the most incriminating documents. The video went live with a single, defiant title: "Justice is Coming." I knew that once the video hit the internet, there would be no turning back. It was a digital wildfire, spreading rapidly across social media, news sites, and online forums. The truth was out, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The news broke while I was packing a bag, preparing to disappear. The headline flashed across my phone screen: "Local businessman and prominent lawyer exposed in massive corruption scandal." The story detailed Sterling's illegal activities, Parker's involvement, and the network of corrupt officials who had enabled their crimes. The video I had uploaded was embedded in the article, providing irrefutable proof of their guilt. Within minutes, my phone was blowing up with notifications. The video had gone viral, racking up millions of views in a matter of hours. The comments section was a frenzy of outrage, disbelief, and demands for justice. I watched the chaos unfold from a safe distance, holed up in a remote cabin in the mountains, far from the reach of Sterling and his cronies. I monitored the news, tracked the online chatter, and waited for the inevitable fallout. It didn't take long. The SEC immediately launched an investigation, freezing Sterling's assets and launching legal proceedings. The FBI raided Parker's office, seizing computers, documents, and other evidence. Several politicians and law enforcement officials were placed on administrative leave, pending further investigation. The House of Cards was collapsing, and the stench of corruption was overwhelming. The most satisfying moment came when I saw Parker's face on television. He was being escorted out of his office in handcuffs, his expression a mask of shock, disbelief, and utter humiliation. His eyes darted around, searching for anyone who could help him, but there was no one. He was alone, exposed, and utterly defeated. Sterling, predictably, tried to flee the country, but he was apprehended at the airport, attempting to board a private jet with a suitcase full of cash. His empire, built on lies and deceit, had crumbled before his eyes. The speed and scale of the takedown were breathtaking. They had underestimated me at every turn, blinded by their arrogance and their belief in their own invincibility. They thought they could silence me, intimidate me, and get away with their crimes. They were wrong. The aftermath was a whirlwind of legal battles, media frenzy, and public outcry. Sterling and Parker were both charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Several other individuals were also implicated in the scandal, including politicians, lawyers, and business associates. The investigations dragged on for months, uncovering a tangled web of corruption and deceit. Eventually, Sterling was convicted and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Parker, facing overwhelming evidence, pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate with the authorities in exchange for a reduced sentence. The others involved faced varying degrees of punishment, from fines and disbarment to imprisonment. The entire system had been shaken to its core, and the message was clear: no one is above the law. I watched it all unfold from afar, a silent observer of the destruction I had wrought. I knew that I had risked everything, that I could have lost my life in the process. But I also knew that I had done the right thing. I had exposed the truth, brought the criminals to justice, and restored some semblance of balance to a world that had become increasingly corrupt and unjust. The faces of Parker and Sterling, etched with the agony of their downfall, were permanently seared into my memory. Their arrogance had been their undoing, and their downfall was my victory. The knowledge of their ruin washed over me, a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. It wasn't the euphoric rush I had imagined. Instead, it was a quiet sense of closure. They had lost everything: their freedom, their wealth, their reputations. I had taken it all away, piece by piece, and watched their world crumble around them. The phone rang. It was the lead investigator in the case, thanking me for my help. He informed me that because of my evidence, they were able to uncover a large-scale criminal operation. He stated they were eternally grateful. I simply replied, justice was served. He told me it was safe to come home. I looked out at the snow-covered mountains, a sense of peace washing over me. It was over. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's a reckoning, a way to restore balance when the scales of justice have been tipped too far. It's a reminder that actions have consequences and that no one is immune to the consequences of their choices. It's not about seeking pleasure in the suffering of others. It's about holding them accountable for their actions and ensuring that they never have the opportunity to hurt anyone again. It's about reclaiming your power and refusing to be a victim any longer. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.